Shalom. Jews certainly prize study, but there's one night a year when it's especially considered to be meritorious to study Torah. In fact, many communities study all night, and that is the first night of Shavuot. We call that Tikkun Lel Shavuot. Now, Tikkun means repair. And what is the origin of this custom, and why did Jews do it? In fact, there are many synagogues and religious communities that'll have all-night study sessions. So what's the basis of it? Well, the first time we hear about it is in the Zohar, which is the 13th century compendium of mystical thought. And there's no direct evidence, but some people believe that the circle of mystics who created the Zohar actually observed the Tikkun. But the only text and it's the only text from the medieval period that mentions it, but the first actual Tikkun that's described occurs in a letter dating to the mid-16th century. The letter was by the mystic Alkabetz, author of the Lechadodi, which is part of the Kabbalat Shabbat service, and describes a tikkun held in the early 1500s by Joseph Caro in the city of Salonika. Now, Caro was born in Spain before the expulsion in 1492, and he lived in the Ottoman Empire. Now, we know him mostly because he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law, but he was also a prominent Kabbalist, and he invited Alkabetz and other like-minded mystics to prepare for Shavuot with a night of study. Now, it's interesting, the United Synagogue, which is the conservative movement's lay organization, sent out a Tikkun program, which, very interesting, it gave a little snippet of information and discussion items for each of the Parshiot of the Torah, all 54, and it suggested that you divide these up among the people attending and that they study them and then report back to the main group. Well, it's based on the origin of what Caro said, because Shavuot, after all, is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah in Jewish tradition. And so you want to study Torah, but you can't study everything in one night. You couldn't study it all in one lifetime. So what he did was, he suggested that you take a recitation of verses from the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and then he turned to the Mishnah. And according to the legend, he fell into a trance and started speaking in tongues, which is interesting to us because there's no tradition of speaking in tongues in Judaism today. But of course, among certain evangelical Christians, Pentecostals, I think, they speak in tongues. It's kind of what we consider gibberish, babbling of languages where there's no specific words meant. And then, originally, according to this tradition, you couldn't understand what he was saying, but his words were beautiful and comforting to the listeners. And then he began speaking in a way that people could understand through the voice of the Mishnah. And he addressed everyone present there. And basically, the voice, Joseph Caro, speaking through the language of the Mishnah, praised everybody there, and depicted God in exile and distress, comforted by the words of the Torah. And it taught them mystical secrets of the Torah, urged them to continue studying, and to engage in mystical practices and make aliyah. It also told them, though, that the full secrets of the Torah could not be revealed to them because they had failed to gather a minyan. So then they studied the next day, too, and they gathered a minyan. They vowed not to sleep even on the next day, but study the second night of Shavuot, too, which they did. And it continued to teach mystical secrets and plead with them to make aliyah. It told them that the coming of the Messiah was not far off and that their work would aid in the redemption of God. Now, Alkabetz's account of this was published throughout Europe, and it served to publicize this practice. It became popular both in Europe and throughout the Turkish Empire. And then Alkabetz and Joseph Caro made aliyah and moved to Sfat, where it's the center of Jewish mysticism. So over the course of time, it became significant to study on the night of Shavuot, and the act was seen as an act of tikkun, of repair, because of God's deep distress at the failure of the Messiah to come, and the way in which we could repair the sins of the past through this practice. Now, one of the things was they noted that the Israelites slept the night before the giving of the Torah, and they were woken up to thunder and the shofar, and according to the tradition, if they would not have slept that night, but been aware and studying, that the Messiah would have come. Thus, the oral and written Torah then are symbolically completed during a tikkun by this practice of reading the various verses of the Torah, and then the first and last verse of each parsha is studied often. Each book of the Tanakh was read, in addition to the first and last mission of each tractate of the Talmud. So you symbolically then, through this tikkun process, study all the main central texts of Judaism, the Bible and the Mishnah. Now, some people have changed the practice and no longer do that, the studying the verses, but pick a specialized area of study. The idea is to study Torah. So we view it as simply honoring the Torah and honoring Judaism, but of course it has this mystical aspect too of repairing the universe. The Tikkun Lel Shavuot, this wonderful custom. I urge you to find a center if you can to go study, and if you can't, then there are so many resources, but spend as much time as you can. The first night of Shavuot, and this year in 2009 it falls on Thursday night, studying the Torah in honor of the anniversary of the giving of the Torah.